Oftentimes, when you are building a Vue project, there is a high chance that you bring in some component library like Vuetify, BootstrapVue, and etc. to help you more quickly start building the project, unless your company can afford maintaining a custom library, for example. We know that a component library comes with pre-configured UI components that can be customized further through props, slots, and etc., which is a common thing. Now let's say you are using a component library like Vuetify, where you have a vButton component which offers tons of pre-configured props to customize the look and behavior of the component. And for instance, you don't like the default configuration, so you start overriding those with the provided props. For example, let's say you want your button to have extra large size, rounded corners, outline style, have a primary color, and also show a loading text instead of a default spinner for loading state. So you apply all the necessary props, slot modifications, and you are good to go. But your app grows and you want the same button everywhere in your app, so you start duplicating your configured Vuetify button everywhere, which of course sucks, because now you have to copy and paste a tons of code, and I see a lot of people doing this thing. This leads to bloated templates and bigger file sizes, and even worser, imagine that you have 500 buttons already integrated, and then your designer comes in and says, hey, I want all of the buttons on the website to have sharp borders and filled style. And now you have to reconfigure 500 buttons throughout your application, which again sucks because you waste time and resources for such a trivial change that nobody wants. So, what we could do to avoid such a problem? The answer is, instead we can create a custom transparent wrapper component over the Vuetify one, which will be pre-configured with your prop and slot definitions, at the same time maintaining all of the Vuetify buttons APIs and functionality. You can think of this as kinda a higher order component which takes a Vuetify component and returns the modified version of it that complements your design needs. Now with this in mind, let's jump into the code and see how we can implement such wrapper. Behind the scenes, I have quickly scaffolded a brand new project with Vuetify package added to it. By the way, here we are using Vue version 2 because Vuetify doesn't support Vue 3 yet, but the example will fully apply to Vue 3 as well, with some minor syntax changes. Alright, here in the browser we have got a simple configured raw Vuetify button without any wrapper. And let's check out how it looks in the code right now. So you can see we have a simple V button with some props for styling and a slot for defining a custom UI for the loading state. In our case it's just a text, in Vuetify default is a spinner. Already you can see that to set up such a button we need to apply tons of props and a slot inside. Now let me import our custom wrapped app button and show the difference it will make. Here I have replaced the Vuetify button with our app button, and immediately you can see how clean our code become. Now we just have a component with a text, and if we check the browser, the result should be exactly how it was in the first raw example. So now let's check out how the wrapper is actually implemented. Starting from template, we are basically rendering a V button with some additional bindings, and those are the props that we want to override, which in our case are these 4 props, and we're setting each value to an appropriate prop that we defined further down, which we will look in a moment. Next, we are using vbind directive to pass any other props or attributes to vButton with the $attributes instance property, which holds all the attributes that were not recognized as props in this component. This makes sure that our wrapper component will have the same props API that vButton offers. Also at the end, we are using von directive to pass all the event listeners with $listeners instance property so that they can be handled by vButton as well. So we passed all the props and events to vButton, but what about slots? In this case, we need to pass all slots from our wrapper down to the vButton itself. And it's done easily by iterating over the $slot instance variables keys, which correspond to the slot names, which we are binding as template tag slot property, and inside of it we are creating the actual slot placeholder with the name passed as well. Then further down, we are also checking if we don't find the loader slot in the slots variable, then we want to render our default loading text instead of vButton spinner. In the script part, we are obviously importing the vButton. Then in the components, we are first setting inherit attributes option to false, which will disable Vue's default behavior of applying attributes to the first root element, because we are handling those ourselves by passing them to vButton with the vbind directive. And the rest of the component are just prop definitions that match the Vuetify's props, but with the default values set to those we want. So that is actually going to be it, and this is the basic setup for any kind of wrapper component. At this point, you can go further and extend the component even more by adding your custom functionality, because the wrapper is just a normal component as any others.